From long-lost families to lies and deceit, stay tuned to number 1 to hear my own shocking personal findings from DNA test results. Number 10. Mom's Little Secret. Let me ask you an obvious question. Why do we take DNA tests? So we can find out our ancestry, right? To see where we come from and what our extended family is like. Well, for one family, that was what happened, but not in the way they intended. For you see, one woman decided to do a DNA test, and what she found out was that her brother was only her half-sibling, which would be impossible, unless there was something very secretive going on in the family. Turns out she was born from an affair, and when she was born, her mother passed her off as her own child and her husband's. So thus, she not only lied, but lied for a great deal of time. Or, as the child noted, her mother was likely going to try to take this secret to her grave, but science caught up to her. This is embarrassing on so many levels, but not the least of which was that the mother has a lot of explaining to do. Number 9. Secret Son. Sadly, this kind of thing happens more often than you might realize. For example, there was a biologist by the name of George Doe, and as a gift to his parents, he decided to give them a 23andMe rundown, which is a DNA test and ancestry website that links test takers by relationship. A very nice gift, and one with the best of intentions. Why? Well, he wanted to test to see if there were going to be any health issues in the family, whether for him or for his children, as the DNA test often show that. So he gets the test back, and everything looks good, right? His parents were indeed his parents, and everything seemed to be straightforward. But as part of the test, if the database of the service, in this case 23andMe, has a potential DNA match to another person, they'll show it to you if you want. Sure enough, the report had options for George, and it referenced a man about his age named Thomas that had a 22% DNA match to him. He asked his dad about it, and he didn't know a Thomas. But upon looking deeper into the dad's ancestry file, Thomas popped up again, but this time with a 50% DNA match. Thomas was the dad's son, and George, along with the rest of the family, was shocked. This sadly ended with the divorce of George's parents, and the father is now very much estranged from the family. While George doesn't regret doing the test, he does wish that there were more warnings about what he might find in the DNA test results. Number 8. Not So Native Americans. Before we talk about this DNA finding, take a moment to like this video and join the Zero to Hero community by using the buttons below. Also, don't forget to click that little notification bell so you can stay up to date on all of our new videos. This is the story of Doreen Isherwood and Anne Hall, two very regular and average women who were living in England. They were born and raised there, but they were curious as to their ancestry, and thus each sent in a DNA test. But while they did get genetic markers for various parts of Europe, they also had strong Native American markers. Being that they were born and raised in England, this was very odd. So they did some research, and there were a few ways that this could be possible. The first is that there were Native Americans captured during the early settler days and brought back to England, not unlike the rumored story of Pocahontas, minus the capturing of course. The other possibility, one that history says is quite probable, is that Native Americans actually made it all the way to England on their own and actually lived in the communities there once they arrived. Either way though, it was certainly a shock to these two ladies. Number 7. Larry David's newest joke. One of the biggest reasons that we do DNA tests is that we're fed our heritage by people that we know and trust, and thus, we believe what they tell us no matter what, because we don't know any different. So for legendary writer and comedian Larry David, when he told people that his heritage was largely Jewish, he wasn't lying because he himself was Jewish, and his family was Jewish, so it seemed like the logical conclusion. Turns out, not so much. According to his DNA results, he was in fact 55% European in heritage as well as 32% Native American. That's quite a long ways from being mostly Jewish. Now, that's not to say that others in this family weren't Jewish, but it's clear that the family known as the Davids got around a lot, and thus the heritage is a lot more complex than what he believed. See, even celebrities have shocking histories. Number 6. Things you really don't want to know. If it's not clear by now, these DNA tests can show some really dark sides of people's families. Not all of them, mind you, but some of them. And while it may be painful for the parents to admit the truth, it most definitely is painful for the children who have to find out that their parents weren't as faithful and honest as they had believed. Here's a really sad example of this. Two girls were sisters, had their DNA test done. What they found out was that the only relation between them was their mother. And the man that they had been calling their father wasn't their father at all. In fact, they each had a different father. Uh-oh. But it gets worse. For the sisters took the DNA test results to their mother and father and demanded an answer, which they immediately regretted. For they found out that their parents were into group love, if you get my drift. And thus, they had the potential of many different fathers. Too much information. Number 5. A happy result. For people like Matt Henniger, having DNA ancestry tests done can be a godsend. He knew from a young age that he was adopted, and every time he tried to find his real family, he failed. So he went and did a DNA test. But aside from finding out about his heritage, he didn't get any useful information. Then, months later, he got a message from a woman named Joyce Bergener. She had found out that they had very similar DNA. Turns out, after some research, that the mother of Matt had him out of wedlock. Being the time she was in and already having a number of children, she put him up for adoption, which is why he never found out about her or her family. But to crown the happy ending here, Matt and Joyce, along with the rest of the family, sans the mother who passed away in 1992, connected, and now they're together and happy. Number 4. David Jancik's mother. David Jancik was like many adopted children, not knowing that he was adopted until much later in his life. Ironically, it was a DNA test that proved who he was and who he wasn't. What separates his own story from others, though, is that when he had his DNA tested, the database showed who his mother might be, a woman named Catherine Morell Sandness. She, in turn, was registered in the database hoping to find David, who she had put up for adoption decades earlier. Through their messages and eventual meeting, David found out about his family and the fact that she gave him up for adoption so that he could have a better life, one that she couldn't provide him at the time. Number 3. Different. Dick Nelson felt that something was off about him and his family from a very early age, mainly because all of his siblings looked so much different from him. His sisters were all blonde and had blue eyes. They also weren't very smart. But Dick, he was brilliant and had brown eyes and black hair. After years and decades of wondering, he finally got a DNA test, and after finding out his father wasn't his father, he asked around the family to see what happened. Apparently, there was an Italian man named Jim Cassiope who dated one of his father's sisters, and apparently they did more than that, if you get my drift. Anyway, his father took him in afterwards, and the rest was history. But for Dick, it was a history that made sense as to who he was, as Cassiope was very much like him, apparently. Number 2. I've been looking for you. Chastity grew up never knowing her father, and her mother would rarely ever talk about him, if at all. But when Chastity decided to get a DNA test, things got a lot clearer. For she discovered that, despite being primarily African, she had a lot of European descent in her DNA, which contradicted what her mother had told her about her father. After finally getting a name, she went into investigative mode and found her father on Facebook. She messaged him. His response? Wow, I've been looking for you forever. The two are now reconnected and learning more about each other. Number 1. My own personal story. It's very rare that I discuss anything personal here on Zero to Hero, but here's a little bit of history. I was adopted at birth with no background on who my birth parents were or my family history. About 7 years ago, I learned of a new technology that was called online DNA testing. So I took one of these tests in hope to find out more about myself and to maybe even get some leads on my birth parents. Unfortunately, no close relatives had taken the test, and the closest relatives I found were 4th and 5th cousins, too far removed to get any solid leads. That was until about 2 months ago, when a first cousin randomly took the test and matched to me. Serendipity. My closest relative match ever. And it gave me a lead as to who my family might be, as I now have my family line narrowed down to a great-grandfather born in the 1800s and his children, one of which was one of my grandparents. This cousin recommended that I take a second test on Ancestry.com, as there were more family members on that site, and it would narrow down who one of my parents might be. To my amazement though, not only did the test prove who my mother is, but the second test also found an aunt and a cousin on my father's side. Unfortunately, my birth mother has made it very clear that she's already closed this chapter in her life and does not want to reopen the book. She has asked that I don't contact her again. But my birth father is a completely different story. He was never told I was born, and no idea that he was a father, never having any biological children of his own. We immediately begin talking on the phone, and 3 days later, which happened to be 1 week before the release of this video, he and I met in person for the first time. He has since introduced me to a very welcoming extended family. I have to say, it has been incredible to learn the story of my birth parents, meet one of them in person, and to make a connection that has always been missing in my life. My hope is, though, that one day my mother will come around. I'd love to thank her for giving me the opportunities that I've had in life, thanks to putting me up for adoption. I don't think I'd be the person that I am today had it not been for the sacrifices made by the loving parents that adopted me and raised me as their own. Tell us your thoughts on these shocking stories of DNA test results in the comments below, and take care.